Hey, it's George back here from intelligentrunning.com. I put up a blog post a couple of days ago about how to taper down for your race. Actually, it was really interesting. I got some great feedback from that post, both via email and on the comments on the post itself. Mainly about people, runners out there saying, well, I didn't really realise you should taper for a race unless it's a marathon, maybe a half marathon, but for 5Ks, 10Ks, do we really need to taper? I just didn't really think about that. So it was good to kind of make it clear that you do need to taper, or at least have some elements of your training that winds down a little bit leading up to the race itself. And whether that's a week to 3 weeks for a marathon, maybe, you've got to kind of weigh up how your training has been going. But that was one thing that came up. But one of the other big questions that came up from that blog post was something I was always intending on covering, but I just wanted to keep that clear for the training. One of the other questions that came up was, I'm sure you've guessed it by now, was nutrition. And how do we fuel ourselves before the run? Now, it is such a big question. And again, one of these nice, hot, controversial topics where everyone's going to have their opinion. Everyone's going to have their favourite way of doing things. And I really like that. But I'm just going to give you my opinion. And that's not to say that it's the only way of doing things. It's just I'm going to give you some of the facts. And hopefully from there you can make your own mind up, and with a bit of luck you can take the best bit of advice I'm going to give you today, which is to practice and experiment with different systems, different ways of doing things. But here we go. So the normal conventional way of doing things is to just eat like your weight in pasta the night before the race and hope that means you're going to top up your glycogen stores. Now let's backtrack a little bit here and let me explain exactly what the whole purpose of carb loading is. For those of you who don't fully understand what the heck I'm talking about right now. Well, the idea of carb loading is that you eat loads and loads of carbohydrates, and your body then stores those carbohydrates in your muscle glycogen stores. So that's where the muscle stores the carbohydrates for use for fuel a little later on when you're running. So that's a good thing. What happens if you train and your carbohydrate stores, your glycogen stores are depleted slightly? Then if you then try and run even a 5K race on depleted glycogen stores, but definitely getting close to the marathon and the full marathon distance, if you're not fully stocked up, then you're not going to have the energy in your muscles to see you through the race. And that's the theory. That's how this whole notion of carb loading came about. And so the general practice is to just eat a boatload of pasta and other carbs the night before, and then that's hopefully going to top up the fuel tanks ready to grind it out the next day. We're giving yourself the best possible start, and that kind of makes sense. Apart from there's a couple of bits missing in this little equation here, which I'm going to come on to in a second. Because there's another school of thought that says you should go even further than that, and before you carb load, you should carb deplete, which just means that you spend a couple of days, maybe 24, 48 hours, just ripping through your stored carbs, which means high intensity training and low carb diet for a couple of days. So you cut out the pasta and all the starches, all your veggies, your fruit, all sources of carbs are out of your diet. You drop it right down, and then once you've dropped right down, then you pump it back up. And you have your big dose of heavy, high carb meals the day before the race. So that's carb depletion and carb loading. Now, perfectly honest, I've never tried the carb depletion and carb loading. I just don't think it doesn't make sense to me as to why I would want to do that. It's far more likely that I'm going to actually be low on energy and I'm going to feel pretty crap on the day of the race itself. So I've never gone in for that. I've tried the carb loading school of thought, and that's I think maybe psychologically that's worked quite well. But what's most important is that you're starting the race with high energy stores. So that's definitely what we want to do. The question really is how do we best make sure that happens without going over the top and eating just so much carb the night before that actually we feel bloated and frankly quite sick on the day of the race. And really this comes back to something I always say when I talk about racing, is you don't really want to do anything different on race day in the lead up to the race than you would do for your long run. In fact, every long run you do, especially when you're looking at 10Ks, halves or full marathons, every long run you do really should be a mini race. So you should be looking at getting your kit out the night before, having a good night's sleep, eating a good healthy meal the night before, getting up in the morning and doing all the things you will be doing on race day, like eating the right breakfast, having plenty of hydration, fluids to drink to make sure you're hydrated, and then warming up as you would normally warm up on the race day. So all those things, it should never change. So the notion of all of a sudden throwing all that practice out the window and just diving into the carbs the day before the race, just again, to me, it just makes no sense whatsoever, even if there are some physiological benefits to it. As long as you have got a good amount of carbohydrate in your system and you haven't done loads and loads of carb depleting work in the 48 hours prior to the race, you will have enough carbohydrate in your system. Now, most of my programs, I recommend not training the day before the race. Maybe a light jog sometimes, but most of the time, just have a complete day of rest. And if you do that and you eat sensibly, your normal diet, then your carbohydrate stores in your muscles, your glycogen stores, they're going to be topped up anyway. So there's no need to go nuts and really go crazy with the carbohydrates. So where does that leave us for the 2 weeks or 3 weeks prior to the race? Well, the cleaner you can make your nutrition, the better. And that's kind of all the time. You really want to be eating as clean as you can as a runner, because it's going to make a big difference to your performance and to your improvements and to your adaptations and recovery between sessions. But we're all human beings. I know that isn't always going to be the case. But when it comes to the short period of time before the race, you know what? It's just time to knuckle down. Clean up your diet, cut out the booze, cut out the caffeine, cut out the sugar, cut out the processed foods, cut out the wheat. Just give yourself as clean a diet as you can and give yourself that chance to really fuel yourself and to just flush out as much of the toxic waste inside your body as possible. And that really is what happens when you eat those foods. Your body builds up toxins, and that's not a good thing for runners or for anybody for that matter. So we want to flush out all the toxins, and we want to make sure we're starting the race with a good clean sheet, and we've got not just good energy stores, but good energy pathways, and we've got a very efficient system. So really, taking those principles, there's nothing really that different that you have to do on race day or the day before that you wouldn't have normally done on building up to your long runs, especially the last few long runs. Just make sure you feel in control. If you feel like you need to have a little bit of extra rice the night before, some extra carbs, then okay, do that. If that's going to make you feel psychologically like you're topped up, but don't go crazy, because all that extra energy is only going to be stored in one place, and that's going to be right in your tummy there. So don't go crazy with the carbs, because it's not necessary. Now, I'm going to talk in a separate video about what to do on the run itself. So we've got our immediate pre-race, our during the race refueling and rehydration strategies. I'm going to give a little bit of an insight into that. And then also after the race. Well, what do you do after it? How do you best refuel after the race? I think you're going to like that one the best. So stay tuned. I'm going to send that information over to you in the next couple of days, along with a bit more info about race tactics itself and some specific practical things you can do leading up to the race, on the day itself and the weeks leading up to it. So stay tuned for that. I'm George Anderson. This is intelligentrunning.com, and I'll speak to you next time.